Hi and welcome to the Really Indie Roads podcast, and we're here today to run down our respective top 10 films by the esteemed writer and director Richard Linklater. And today I'm not joined by David or Jose or even Ben Lord, but making her first appearance on the podcast is Sarah from Popcornchat, who I'm fairly certain could name more Linklater films than the rest of my co-hosts put together. Hey Sarah, how's it going?
Hi, all good, thanks Neil. Thank you for having me on. I'm really excited to talk about Linklater, one of my favourite directors, so I'm excited.
So, the first question then, what was the first Linklater film you saw? And from that, what made you become a fan of his?
Yeah, the first Linklater film I saw, sort of not really knowing that it was him, was School of Rock. I saw it back in the cinema in 2003, just sort of give my age away there. And I just absolutely fell in love with it, like the whole kind of, essence of it and the sort of childlike, play of it all. And I didn't really know it was Linklater till I was much older. I got really sort of into Linklater's work when I went to university. And of course, I'm sure like many film lectures, they show you Dazed and Confused. So that's when I started to really pick away at his, his technique and his style. But yeah, School of Rock was my first experience.
For me, it was Dazed and Confused, and showing my age, I saw this late on Channel 4 one night around 1 o'clock in the morning. And I must have been around 19 or 20 myself at the time. And I was getting in from the late shift at McDonald's. And it's funny, I was like pretty aimless in my life myself at that point. Like I hadn't quite realised that my band wasn't going to make it. And I saw so many parallels between like the kids in that film. It was like, well, you're being told by your friends and your parents and your teachers, you've got to go and do something. But what if you don't really know what you want to do at that age? And I was like, yeah, I don't want to know what to do. And just watching this film, I was like, wow, that's kind of feels, even though it's America in the 70s, that definitely feels what it's like for me and my group of friends here in like the late 90s. And secondly, it was full of awesome 70s rock music. I mean, like the soundtrack is one of the best classic rock soundtracks of all time. I rewatched it recently just for this podcast, and my dad had never seen it. And I was like, Dad, you've got to watch it. And I thought, well, because it's obviously Linklater has quite his own style, and I was like, I don't know if he's going to go for that, but he watched it and liked it because of the music, like the music, and then all the cars and that, and all the fashions and that. It pulled him in. I think reminded him of him in the 70s. But thirdly, it bucked the Hollywood trend of the standard studio films that I was used to seeing back then. It's like Independence Day, Face Off, all your typical big Hollywood. I hadn't really watched any independent films at that point. And Dazed and Confused kind of introduced me to that, and lots more late night indie films on Channel 4 Film 4 at that time. Brilliant 90s American independent cinema. So, Tarantino, the Coen brothers, Spike Lee, Kevin Smith. I mean, I was basically living Clerks 2 at that point, fast food restaurant, band is not going nowhere and not knowing one. I was like, Jesus Christ, I'm like Dante when I was watching that. So yeah, indeed, it was Dazed and Confused that set me on my path in the media degrees, because I saw a local college was doing a one night a week film studies class, so I signed up. And the lecturer persuaded me to do the BTEC media. Then I went on to do my film degree. So yeah, I think Linklater was a massive influence on my early life there. But before we get to our top 10s, a little bit about the man himself. So Richard Stewart Linklater was born in Houston, Texas in 1960. And he grew up playing American football and baseball. And yet with his sports background, he still won a Scholastic Art and Writing Award. And far from staying on the expected path towards playing sports, instead he dropped out and went to work on an oil rig. And when home, he'd make frequent visits to his repertory cinema, which I had to look up because I did not know what repertory meant in terms of cinema. And basically, it's just a cinema that shows old classic films. And it was here that Linklater decided he wanted to become a filmmaker. And with his savings, he bought a Super 8 camera, projector, editing equipment, and moved to Austin, Texas. Now, Linklater made many short films for years, honing his craft in Austin, also setting up the Austin Film Society in 1985. And in 1988, he finally made his first film, It's Impossible to Learn How to Plow by Reading Books. Made on a budget of only $3,000, it's a one-man show, written, directed, edited, produced, shot by, and starring Linklater himself as the main protagonist, who receives a tape message from a friend telling him to blow off school for the day and leave Austin. What follows, according to Wikipedia at least, is what would become classic Linklater, and it involves train journeys and long rambling conversations. See, sadly, I'm yet to see this because it's never been made commercially available in the UK to the best of my knowledge, and it's only available as a bonus feature on the Criterion release of his next film, which was Slacker, and unfortunately that's not out in the UK. I was about to say, have you seen this very first film?
No, I haven't. I mean, I thought his first film was actually Slacker, so it shows actually how little I know. But even because I was watching a few Linklater films about a month ago, chatting to someone else, and I couldn't find Slacker either, like on streaming. It was like really, really hard to find. So I'm still yet to see that one, and yeah, especially this first one. But I'm curious because it very much sounds like a Linklater film. The slacking off and it sounds great.
Even from his very first film, a lot of the themes that he would keep repeating in all his work that keep throughout the years, they were there from like day one. And I think just as his career's expanded, just as his career has developed, he's expanded on all his different points and what he wants to talk about. So finally, before we get to our top tens, we're going to do a quick run through his filmography from his first film down to the next one he's got hopefully coming out. So first off, 1988, It's Impossible to Learn to Plow by Reading Books. 1990, Slacker. 93, Dazed and Confused. 95, Before Sunrise. 96, Suburbia. 98, The Newton Boys. 2001, Waking Life. 2001 as well, Tape. 2003, School of Rock. 2004, Before Sunset. 2005, Bad News Bears. 2006, A Scanner Darkly. Also in 2006, Fast Food Nation. A little bit of a gap then to 2008 with Me and Orson Welles. 2011, Bernie. 2013, Before Midnight. 2014, and let's be honest, about 12 years before that as well, Boyhood. 2016, Everybody Wants Some. 2017, Last Flag Flying. 2019, Where'd You Go, Bernadette. 2022, Apollo 10 and a Half, A Space Age Childhood. 2023, which is coming to Netflix some point soon, is a film called Hitman that I'm desperate to see because I'm hearing really good things from reviews about it. And his biggest announced project still to come is Merrily We Roll Along, still to be confirmed. And we'll talk about that a little bit towards the end. So, Sarah, what do you have at number 10 on your Linklater list?
At number 10 on my Linklater films, I have Bernie from 2011. This is a film I saw sort of quite late on in my Linklater watch through. I remember one being my lecturer always sort of said, "Oh, this is one to watch. You know, Jack Black does a great performance. It's something a little bit different," and it is. It's very different tonally as well. I think for Linklater, like it's got that kind of mockumentary style to it, cut in with this drama, and it's about real people. You know, it's this real situation that did happen. And which is something he does do throughout his filmography. He does draw upon real people, and I liked the performances from Jack Black. I liked the kind of dark comedy, and I liked the interviews that are thread throughout that had that documentary feel to it. You know, because they felt so genuine and they felt organic, and then you sort of realise that a lot of the people that are doing those interviews were real people, or like for example, one of them was Matthew McConaughey's mum. Like they just roped in everyone into this film, and it's just such an interesting watch. And I think being a Linklater fan, I'm also a Jack Black fan because he does use a lot of the same cast in a lot of his films, so you're going to see a lot of familiar faces. And I've really sort of learned to appreciate the range of Jack Black in his films, and I think this is such a good one. And I always recommend it. You might have a stereotype of Jack Black as a performance kind of actor. I think this one's a little bit different. So I really like this one. It's quite enjoyable to watch as well.
Yeah, I've only seen it the once, and I do remember thinking at the time, I was like, wow, this is very different for Jack Black. And I almost felt at the time it was like a conscious decision for him to show, no, wait, I'm not like the loud, shouty, funny guy. I can be a serious, dramatic actor if need be. And I think he proved it there. Problem is, not that many people saw it, sadly.
Yeah, exactly.
It is one of those sort of underground cult films now where you say, oh, Bernie, what's that? Jack Black? No, I've never heard of it. Go and watch it.
Yeah, it's really good. I implore everyone to go and watch it. Like even now, it's 2011, but it still holds up. And when you find out that it's sort of based on a real life situation, I think that's what makes it even more bizarre and sort of adds to it, really.
So at my number 10, I have Linklater's first film, Slacker, and there's a quote which I'm paraphrasing from Michael Moore, the documentary maker, and there's this great 90s book where he was quoted in called Spike, Mike, Slackers and Dyke, and it was by a guy called John Pearson. It was all about American 90s indie cinema. In fact, I think I might have read it at uni. Moore's recounting seeing Slacker at a film festival where his first film, Roger and Me, was playing at the same time. And he said, I really enjoyed parts of it, but then I did fall asleep through some bits of it. And it's funny because I kind of know what he means with this. Because, as we say, Slacker was Linklater's first proper film in 1990, which he shot in and around Austin, Texas. And it only cost $23,000. And indeed, Linklater starts off the film himself as a talkative taxi passenger who starts telling that I couldn't care less cab driver about this strange dream he had. And again, that's kind of the one key tenet of Linklater's later work, where exploring dreams, what do they mean, and all that kind of stuff. And the plot, such as it is, follows a bunch of different characters, usually for only one scene, before they bump into a different character, and then the camera will go off and follow that new character. So it's a bold choice in filmmaking that it does, on initial viewing, make the film quite a difficult watch, I found, the first time, because it's so experimental and constantly shifting characters every scene. But also, the conversations these people have encapsulate a lot of themes that would be prevalent in Linklater's later work, such as social exclusion, political marginalisation, social issues, unemployment, and government control of the media. So I wouldn't call this essential for anyone other than Linklater completists. And indeed, I only saw it after I began working my way back through his filmography. But if you're a fan of his, it is definitely worth seeking out to kind of see, okay, that's where he kind of started that idea and where he developed that thread later on in his career as well.
Yeah, I've yet to see that one. I've seen the opening scene where Richard Linklater is in the film, which must be very like Inception kind of moment. But it's one like I say, as a completist, I need to go back and watch it, find it on physical media or something somewhere, and just watch it. Like say, it's inspired so much more of his later work. I have to see it, otherwise I can't really call myself a Linklater fan, I feel.
Well, I mean, we just need to harass Criterion to release it in the UK now. See, the Criterion version is out in the States, and it has his very first low-budget film, It's Impossible to Plough by Reading Books, on there as well. As a bonus feature. It's a 90-minute film, but it's on there as a bonus feature. So,
gosh, I'm going to have to get one of those Universal, Blu-ray players and see if someone can send it to me.
Back in the day for like regular DVDs. I had one back in the day. And I just import DVDs from Canada on the cheap. Sometimes months before they were even in cinema over here.
Yeah.
I mean, that's how I discovered Donnie Darko 2 years before it was released, and I've still got that original DVD of it.
Oh, that's amazing.
So what do you have at number 9, Sarah?
My number 9, which I'm sure is going to be a surprise to some people, is Everybody Wants Some. Again, I probably watched this as at uni again, very relatable in this one. We've had Dazed and Confused, which talks about high school. This one talks about college. Following a group of baseball players and sort of navigating this sort of freedom you have, at 18 or 19, you go into college. And it's obvious that he's trying to sort of emulate what he did in Dazed and Confused and the success of that. But I think this one does something a little bit different. It looks a bit more clean cut, obviously, like it's filmed a lot later with new cameras and stuff. But I think at the heart of it, it's got the same kind of dynamics, and he's trying to get in this sort of character that we follow, tries to get into sort of the baseball team. And like it's a great setup for like all these great young up and coming actors at the time. Like we've got Glenn Powell, who he loves to work with now, Blake Jenner, Zoe Deutsch, Tyler Heckley, and Wyatt Russell. Like these great actors, and I just love the aesthetic. Anytime that Linklater goes back and does some kind of 60s or 70s kind of decades, I absolutely love it because he just nails the whole costume, the haircuts, like the color palette. He just understands that sort of tonal sort of genre really, really well. I've not seen it for a while, so maybe my opinion might have changed, but I really enjoyed this one. And it just, it was like a later progression of Dazed and Confused. They could be a great kind of double bill. If you want to watch both, I think you could watch them sort of conjunctively.
Yeah, I think if we have a program like a Linklater festival, then you have to have the two of them back to back, don't you?
Yeah, I saw the anniversary for Dazed and Confused recently, 30th anniversary. I was like, oh, you've missed a chance there. I think I would love to see. I know it's not an anniversary, but I'd love to see Everybody Wants Some with it. It'd be great on the big screen.
I mean, Linklater's probably not the director for it, but I'd love like a film set in the 90s that dealt with like all the grunge music in the 90s scene, made in the modern day. That feels to me like the next kind of evolution of that. Problem is, the perfect director to do it for that has kind of already done it, and it was Cameron Crowe, because he did Singles.
Yes, yeah.
And yet I remember not liking the film at all when I saw it, because I was like really into my sort of grunge music, and then I was like, oh, it's got like, I'm sorry, but people don't go out to a club where Alice in Chains are playing and like dance like they're going to the disco. Like I remember that. I just remember that scene annoying the piss out of me when I was younger.
Yeah.
But then you got Chris Cornell in it as like the Stone Next Door Neighbor. You got Pearl Jam in it and his like backing band. But I suppose being like young grungy teenager, I was like, I don't want this crappy love story and about serious adults in it. I want a film about the music and the bands and that. And there's never really been that film yet. So I suppose Linklater by that time though was like making. He's not the guy really to do that, because he was doing other stuff. Clearly, he was doing a lot of other stuff in the 90s. But perhaps I'll have to do it someday. That's it. Write the film, the grunge film, because I'm sure we could start getting the rights now. Because almost everyone involved with those bands is dead. So. My number 9 is Tape, which is Linklater's 2001 film, and it's kind of another experiment of form from him. But for once, it wasn't written by him. It's actually Stephen Belber, based on his play of the same name, starring Ethan Hawke, again, one of Linklater's go-to guys for most of his career, Robert Sean Leonard, and Uma Thurman. The entire film takes place in real time in one location, a hotel room. Now, the film deals with two friends, Vince and John, reminiscing about their high school years until it becomes apparent they both dated the same woman, Amy, at one point. except Vince claims John raped Amy and then gets a taped confession before Vince tells John that Amy will be joining them soon. It then doesn't really go the way you think it's going to go, because when they bring up the rape, Amy claims the encounter was consensual, which John doesn't believe. So then things escalate with Amy calling the police to arrest both of them, Vince for drugs, John for sexual misconduct. John decides to wait for the police, and Vince flushes his drugs down the toilet and destroys the confession tape. Amy then reveals she didn't call the police and leaves us a very ambiguous ending. We talk about shows today like The Bear and how they can induce tension and escalation within a scene, and this film was doing this way back in 2001. I think Uma Thurman has rarely been better in this upon her arrival in the film, and this was Hawke's third film with Linklater. Well, it's fourth, because he was probably shooting Boyhood at the same time. We just didn't know about it. So yeah, after Before Sunrise and The Newton Boys. And I think what the film does really well is it flips our assumptions halfway through about Vince and John. As the film starts, Hawke's Vince is the aggressive drug dealer, loser character playing against type, while Robert Sean Leonard, most known for Dead Poets Society and a strong theatre career at the time, is like, the charmingly, seemingly has his life together guy. But when the accusation comes out, we just see it flip round, and we see that Vince has carefully crafted this whole situation to ensnare John and get his confession on tape. So, I mean, with conversations about consent even more prevalent today than they were back then, Tape was admirably trying to shine a light on these issues 23 years ago.
Wow. Yeah, I've never seen Tape. It's one that, again, I had to go back and watch those early films still. I didn't know that Ethan Hawke and Uma Thurman did a film together, which is interesting.
I think this is probably when they were together as well. It had to be, right? So
yeah, because obviously, I'm sure we'll get to it later, but, other marital things happen. That is obviously still reflected in Linklater's films. But yeah, no, it sounds interesting, that one. And like you say, it's still relevant today.
I think it's more relevant today than it was back then, but the fact that like they were addressing these issues in 23 years ago, and now they're quite rightly being shined upon in loads of films now, but no one was really talking about it then. So but again, I didn't check what the budget on this one was, but I know it literally was all shot on videotape for that aesthetic, and I had to get it on import DVD again because it wasn't in the cinemas over here back then when it did come out. So what do you have at number 8?
My number 8 is Last Flag Flying, which is probably more one of his recent films. It came out in 2017. I only watched this film about a month ago. I think it's a real hidden gem. Like, first off, when you see the cast, Steve Carell, Bryan Cranston, Lawrence Fishburne, you're like, oh my god, what a great cast! Like 3 great actors, comedic actors and dramatic actors, and I think that really works for this film because it's like Linklater doesn't really do a lot about death in his films. It's more about life and the ups and downs of that, and I guess death does come into that eventually, but the way he handles it and like the dark comedy from the main actors and everything, I think it comes across really well. There's obviously some commentary on sort of the American army in particular, nationalism and all that, so I think it's very interesting, and it's like it one that completely passed me by until about a month ago, and it just really caught my attention. In the first 10 minutes I was like, oh yeah, I'm gonna like this film. But yeah, again, I don't think many people have seen it, and like it's funny because in his career, like those early ones, I think a lot of people were there, like yourself, like those sort of smaller indie films. Then he got quite big in the 90s, early 2000s, and he's kind of dipped a little bit. Like, there's a few recent ones that I've had to really sort of, find buried amongst, Amazon Prime or whatever, but they are there, and this was one of them for me. But yeah, I think if I'm not massive on, sort of war kind of films, but what it says about their experience of Vietnam, where America's at nowadays, and there's like things about religion. I just think it's a really interesting dynamic, and the conversations feel very familiar, whether it's it's on Before Sunrise, they're having a chat on the train, or they're doing it in commuting a body. It's still happening in this film, so that's what made it feel like Linklater still was those conversations about everyday life. So yeah, I really enjoyed this one.
Yeah, I think you hit it on the head there. Like Linklater, it doesn't matter what his film's about or where it's set or who the characters are. He does people having conversations that seem real better than probably most directors out there.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter, like you say, the situation where they are. Like you say, I had to drink. I remember this popping up on Amazon Prime. I was like, not knowing. No, actually, I think it was coming out. Because I remember, like you said, I saw the cast. I was like, oh, got to see it with those guys in it.
Yeah.
And Linklater, those guys together. But it was quite a. I mean, I enjoyed it, but I felt it was quite, because of the subject matter, I felt quite a somber film. And obviously, you put those people in it and people are going to think, oh, Steve Carell, because he, again, at that point, he was still trying to break away from his overt comedic roles, wasn't he?
Yeah.
So yeah, kind of similar to Jack Black in a way, that he's
Yeah.
he's trying to step. Although I think with Corral's clearly proved that many times over now, that he can be a serious dramatic actor and really superb in a lot of stuff. So for my number 8, yet another slacker opus from Linklater, and this one, it doesn't really get as much love as Dazed and Confused or as his other early films, but I still really enjoy it. And again, it's another film where all the events of the film take place over the course of one night, as a group of kids are just hanging around causing hassle outside a convenience store. Now, this was another Linklater film based on a play by Eric Bogosian, and I think I liked it because the setting and lo-fi aesthetic made me think of Clerks, which was another big favourite of mine from around that time. And of course, the film has a few Dazed and Confused alumni in it, Parker Posey and Nicky Katt, getting a lot more to do here than they did in Dazed and Confused. And the film also stars Giovanni Ribisi and Steve Zahn in very early roles. The film's plot revolves around a convenience store gang expecting a visit from their old high school friend Neil Pony Moynihan, who's the lead singer of an up-and-coming rock band. Coming back as a success, he kind of stirs jealousy within his old friends. And whereas Dazed and Confused dealt with teenagers graduating and not knowing where they want to do with their lives, Suburbia kind of feels like a spiritual successor, that this could easily be some of these kids who didn't leave to go to college and still don't know what they want to do with their lives, even in their early to mid-20s. And again, the reason the film works for me is personal experience. Around the time I saw this, I was probably at college studying film with no clear direction. I was working in a pub part-time, while most of my friends from then had gone off to uni, and I was stuck in the same shitty town. And I think for many people, there isn't that light bulb moment where you suddenly know what you want to do with your life, and you saw that really real representations of some of these characters in the film. I love the damning indictment from the store clerk, Nazir, because the whole way through the film, a few of the characters are being pretty damn racist to him. And at the end of the film, he just kind of looks to the kids and goes, "Look, you kids have it all," and you throw it all away. And I think that's the last line in the film, and you're just like, wow, it's
Yeah.
a bit darker as well. I think because Linklater didn't write it, and it's based on a play, you can see why he picked it, because it deals with a lot of the similar themes. And like I said, it does feel like a spiritual successor to Dazed, but it kind of takes what if these kids still weren't doing anything, and it's a lot darker because of that. And I think because of its darker tone, that's probably why not as many people mention it or talk about it.
Yeah, I've not even heard of the name of this one. I'm just all of yours that you've listed, Neil. I've just not seen any of them, apparently. But it sounds interesting because he does a lot of adaptations as well. I know he does that in his work, so I'm curious to check it out.
It's also got a cracking alt rock soundtrack with Sonic Youth and Beck doing most of the music for it.
Nice.
Yeah, and like proper underground like Sonic Youth and Beck stuff as well. Do you know what's funny? As we've noticed, as kind of working our way through these, is that what's great, and it clearly shows you what a great director Linklater is, that his more recent stuff is the stuff that you've seen more recently and that you like. And for me, it's the older stuff. So it shows you that even as his career's developed, he's still pulling in new fans with his more recent work.
Yeah,
and then
100%.
the great thing is everyone's discovering what a great director is, and then you start working your way back through his filmography.
Yeah, definitely.
So what do we have at number 7?
Number 7 for me is Before Midnight. So this is obviously the third installment in the Before trilogy, where we see Jesse and Celine now middle-aged with their own children, and they're navigating the world as a married couple. Jesse obviously is now being a man of divorce, and he has his child as well, and he's just come over from holiday, and they're trying to balance having their own children, whilst being on holiday, and obviously where they're at in their sort of relationship. But we get that slice of that in this sort of final installment. For me, this is definitely it's a great film, but I think it is the weakest in the trilogy for me. Maybe because I think I find the first two more relatable in terms of where they're at as people and things that have happened in their lives. Maybe I just can't really connect with this one as much, but it just doesn't feel like the same. Like there's less walk and talk, which obviously is really prominent in the first two. They literally they stop and have a dinner, or they go to a hotel room. There's less movement, and I don't know if you could get deep on that and say it's reflective of their relationship or whatever. But yeah, there's just something about this one which it didn't really connect with me in the same way. But as a standalone film, it's still great, but the other two are just so good. So when I watched this one, I was like, oh, is this how I wanted to end? I'm not too sure. Yeah, it's an interesting way to end it.
If that indeed that is the end of it, because I've heard Linklater and Hawke want to do another one, but apparently Julie Delpy's doesn't really want to bother with it now.
Yeah, because it's been over 9 years, hasn't it?
Yeah, so come on, you can easily knock one out next year easily. Although, what would the title be before?
What time could you do?
After midnight. You got Before Midnight. After Midnight, maybe.
Yeah.
That seems the obvious one if we're sticking in with the titles. Yeah, I think what sets this apart from the previous films is it's got a bit of rawness and viciousness in their arguments that we're not used to seeing from these characters. Before Sunrise, we see them meet and kind of vibe and fall enough. In Sunset, we see them reconnect and re-establish that connection. But here we're seeing the hardships of them kind of maintaining happily ever after. And how many films where you have that, traditional romantic films, a couple get together, you don't see 20 years down the line with those
Yeah.
characters. And more than likely or not, it would be similar to this. In fact, they're doing pretty well considering, I think. And I think many people have commented that the film is one of the most realistic portrayals of a relationship on film. And again, it is down to the superb script that's written by Linklater, Delphi, and Hawke. But I think I'd agree with you that, yeah, it's. I think we can identify with the first two four because we've been that age. We're not the age they are in this film yet. So, we're not at that point in our lives where they are in this one. So I think, yeah, you can always relate to the other ones because you kind of see that your own life in those. Whereas I don't think we're at that stage in our lives where we can relate to them in this one. So perhaps you never know, like 10 years down the line, I'll be watching it again. I'll be like, shit, yeah, again, he had it spot on,
Yeah. Most likely, he seems to get him spot on. It's what I always recommend to my mum. I'm like, you should watch this. Like, she's gone through all three of those films. She can relate to something. I was like, you'll love it, honestly. She's like, oh, okay, maybe.
So my number 7, I've got Waking Life from 2001. And this was his first time doing animation using his rotoscope technique, which he'd go on to do again with A Scanner Darkly. And out of the two, though, I think I prefer Waking Life because it just feels like an animated successor to Slacker. I mean, the plot, there really isn't one. It just involves Wiley Wiggins from Dazed and Confused as a nameless protagonist just wandering through a waking dream in a kind of ethereal way where sometimes he observes characters having philosophical discussions and questioning the meaning of life. Sometimes he participates in them. Other times he's not even in the scenes himself. Honestly, I think your mileage on this film will vary on how much weed you may have smoked or how drunk you are. It's a very free-form film that just feels like Linklater has vomited all of his late-night thoughts about every aspect of the human condition and what might lay beyond it into this film. I mean, I remember being most excited when it came out to hear there was going to be a scene where there was going to be like an animated version of Jesse and Celine from Before Sunrise. And according to Wikipedia, it is Jesse and Celine, or even if Wikipedia is right, as then, because it's hinted, because this came out obviously before we'd had any of the sequels to Before Sunrise. So, obviously seeing that film and loving it and then go, oh, wait, this is those characters. So I think, but again, you were, because it was all like dream, like you weren't really sure if it was actually happened or it had happened. So, but I remember that's when I wanted to see it. I was like, I want to see it because because I loved Before Sunrise that much that I wanted to know what was going on with this. So,
Yeah, I've not seen Wake in Life. I've seen his other rotoscope films, so it's interesting seeing just from them two alone, like the progression. So it'd be interesting to go back and watch Wake in Life and see, because I've heard some people say they prefer Wake in Life to Scanner Dark, like yourself, like in terms of the actual animation style. Like it's a bit too distracting in Scanner Darkly, but it's interesting.
what do we have at number 6?
Speaking of rotoscope, my number 6 is Apollo 10.5. So we've got the more modern one in at number 6. So in this film, we follow a 10-year-old boy living in Houston, Texas, and he's navigating nostalgia and fantastical elements as the USA race to the moon. I watched this, 2022 when it dropped on Netflix, and I absolutely fell in love with it. Coming into it not knowing any of Linklater's rotoscoping at the time, this was the first one, so I was like, oh god, I've got it so good. And then going back to it, I was like, oh, maybe not too great. But yeah, I absolutely sort of loved the time that it was set in. It has that kind of 60s essence to it, the colors, and like there's moments where it's just like montages of like, these are the board games we played, this is the type of food we played, and he just really he really encapsulates what it means to be a child in the 60s, which obviously I can't relate to, but for me, I could sort of put myself in that childlike mind, and this sort of film it analyzes the way in which children use imagination, as well as kind of trying to, grow us into young adults. So I just think the whole aesthetic, he captures the music, the clothes, the colors, everything about it feels just like this kind of beautifully sort of candy-like 60s film with a lot of imagination and play. And I love that. Yeah, I absolutely love this one. Obviously, he brings back a lot of his favourites, like we've said before. Jack Black does the narration in this. We have Glenn Powell. We also add in Zachary Levi in this, and obviously you can, with the rotoscope, and you can really tell who these actors are, and it's sort of their performances are able to shine through, I think, with this sort of development in that technology. But I just love it. It's like a perfect Sunday afternoon film. Again, it's one I implore my mum to watch. Being born in sort of the mid-50s, I was like, Mum, honestly, you'll enjoy this and all the references. So again, if it can, talk to me emotionally, and I'm sure it can talk to different generations in, more of a kind of reflective kind of way. So yeah, I love it.
Yeah, this is one I haven't actually seen yet, and I know because it only dropped on Netflix. Was it last year?
Yeah, last year.
And again, it came out of nowhere. I was like,
Yeah.
but it didn't tell you. I just saw there was an anime film, but I don't think it mentioned anywhere that it was a Richard Linklater film.
No, it didn't. It didn't have like, when you have like Scorsese's film or, Tarantino. It's like, oh, Apollo 10.5. There you go.
And I think it must have been months and months later. I was like, oh, this looks like some kid's animated film. So I didn't watch it. And I didn't realise until like months and months later. And it's on my list and I still haven't got around to watching it yet. But I'm definitely going to try and fit it in now. So my number 6, we've just spoke about, which was Before Midnight. So don't need to dive into that again. So we can jump ahead to your number 5.
My number 5 is Boyhood. This one, again, quite late to it. Only watched it this year. Got a nice little Arrow collection with a nice poster and little insight into all the characters.
I've got the same one.
Nice. After MJ's parents divorce, he and his sister Samantha live with their mother, whereas the father has visiting rights, and incidents that occur across the period of this 12 years life. So we sort of follow these characters through, literally from boyhood to manhood as he sort of hits 18 and goes off to college. And I knew this sort of film was going to be for me. As soon as it starts, you have that needle drop. I think it's of Blink-182 or something. I was just like, oh my gosh. And it's what's really scary about this film is how close it is to my life. I think the actor's maybe like 6 months older than me. So a lot of the cultural references in terms of, music, fashion, games, I think they're playing on like a PS1 or I think they were on a Nintendo Wii at some point. I was like, yep, I've been there, I've played that. So the time period in which this film is set over was spookily close to mine, so I was really able to connect to that. I think that watching this film now, I was able to relate to both sides of the children and the adults. I remember being that teenager and having those tantrums, and I would shout at my mum. Yeah, I could really empathise with so much with their mother in this. I think Patricia Arquette is absolutely amazing in this. I felt, I could feel the struggle and the sort of repetition of choosing these, bad men that were in her life and were, unfortunately very sort of abusive to her. So, I could see both sides, which, I'm luckily able to see now. However, I don't think it's perfect. I think it does lose its way a little bit in the last act. People say, it's too long. Like it's not even hitting 3 hours, but I can do that. That's no problem. But I think maybe the pace loses momentum a little bit, and I think the performances from our lead actor, I think, is maybe some of the weaker bits. I think he's great as a child, maybe not as good as an adult, but that's my personal preference. But yeah, Ethan Hawke and Patricia Arquette were fantastic as the parents in this film. Yeah, and I just think it's another cracking film from Linklater, encapsulating life with these sort of small intimate moments and conversations that do happen in a lot of households, and it's something tangible to everyone regardless of where it's set and the time period. Yeah, I just think it spoke very spookily to my life. Like I say, with the time period it sort of was shot in, I was like, oh my god, he's looking into my life. It's very weird.
That's awesome. Yeah, I mean, I suppose when we like that's you the experience I had with Dazed and Confused at that time is pretty much sounds like what you had with Boyhood when you saw it.
Yeah, definitely. It's so scary. Luckily I didn't have a lot of the kind of domestic side to it, but yeah, as a child and the social pressures from school and figuring out what we're going to do, and he does something quite artistic, and I'm the video editor and stuff. So yeah, it was very spooky. So yeah, we've had a similar experience, I think, through Linklater either way.
I mean, yeah, currently this is like his magnum opus, wasn't it? It was one of the most logistically challenging films of all time. Yeah, I mean, it was shot over 11 years, and I love the idea of like charting the coming age of the main character from the ages of 6 to 18. And unlike most filmmakers who'd recast, Linklater just found a young kid and went, right, we're going to stick with him. Patricia Arquette, Ethan, you're going to come back every year and we're going to film a scene or two. And he even got his own daughter to play Mason's sister. I
Mhm.
read something recently where she really wanted to quit at one point on it and didn't want to do it when she hit
Oh,
those
right.
teenage years herself, but like she was just forced to keep on doing it. But yeah, I mean, so every year between 2002 and 2013, Linklater shot parts of this film to make a fictional yet somehow almost documentary film about young Mason's growth through boyhood. I mean, it's a fascinating film, and it's probably his most acclaimed, I would say, because it commercially it made 57 million on a budget of 4 million, and it got 6 Oscar nominations, winning one for Patricia Arquette's role as Mason's mother. I mean, I think this was up for best film that year as well, and I
Yeah.
loved it. But just knew I always have this problem with the Oscars in terms of the big films that win, because they're always biopics, or it's a film where a character's had gone. The acting ones are always characters who've undergone a massive trauma or overcome some obstacle,
Mhm.
and I think the actor who played Mason in it at the time, young Edgar Train, he did say in an interview around the time, and I'm paraphrasing, that films just about the small moments of life, they don't get recognised. No one cares about the small moments of life, but that's exactly the kind of things that we need to see, because all these films where these situations and that doesn't happen a lot of the time.
Yeah.
This is real life, and showing that probably more beautifully than most filmmakers will ever do. But
Mm.
again, it just doesn't have that reach, sadly. I mean, it's interesting to me seeing young Hawke being, kind of like he is in the early other Linklater films. He's like the charming, doesn't know what he wants to do with his life, and clearly doesn't know how to parent when we first meet him in the film. And he largely disappears at points in Mason's life, leaving most of the work to his mother Olivia. And like you say, quite rightly, she won the Oscar for this role. You see her working in shitty jobs, going through repeated failed relationships, and she when she meets Mason's teacher's Bill, even then, initially he seems great until he's revealed to be an abusive alcoholic. But it's just great seeing Hawke and Arquette's characters improve and just get better at life as the years pass. It's not always easy, especially for Arquette's character. But it's just funny seeing Hawke go from young slacker to married father of four, and like going a bit more responsible as he gets older in it. And it's, again, I wonder how much that, you look at Ethan Hawke's career, and I'm pretty sure that mirrors his own life quite in a way. How Arquette, despite her terrible choice of men, is always there doing the absolute best she can for her kids. As I said, I really think this should have done better with the major awards. But to be fair, 2014 was a stacked year. You had Birdman, Grand Budapest Hotel, and Whiplash providing competition, and you can't really say anything against any of those three films winning awards. Although I still maintain he should have won Best Director just for the sheer scope of making a film over 12 years. So that brings us on to my number 5, and that is 2004's Before Sunset. So this is set 9 years before midnight and 9 years after Before Sunrise, in the middle of Linklater's trilogy. Now, after the ending of Before Sunrise, we were kind of left with the question, will Jesse and Celine meet up? And this film answers the question, kind of. And it takes its time to get there. We learn that Celine didn't return as her grandmother died, and after initially saying he didn't return either, Jesse reveals he did return. And what I love about this film is how personal and authentic it feels. Midnight, this was written by both actors and Linklater and writer Kim Kruzan as well. And at the time, Hawke had just undergone a well-publicised divorce from Furman, and that unhappy marriage is a key part of Jesse's backstory in the film. So I'm wondering how much of Hawke's real life situation when he was writing the film with Linklater bleeds through into Jesse's character here, because it definitely seems like it does a lot. I love that he uses the plot of the first film for the plot of his book, which he's currently on the European book tour for, and it's where that and a book reading, that's where he bumps into Celine again. I love, again, I mean, I really, really like this film. It's where Linklater does a great job of involving a time limit on their meeting again. So the first time it's like, right, the train the next day, we got one night to walk and talk in Vienna. The next day it's, right, we've only got so many hours before I've got to get on a plane and go back to my life back in the States. So immediately it sets the clock on the wheel, they won't they again this time. And as they acknowledge near the end of the film, they think he'll miss his flight, which is like, I think one of the lines right towards the end of the film. But it was only when I rewatched this recently for the podcast, and I really enjoyed it a lot more now than I did probably when I first saw it.
Yeah, I was exactly the same. I really enjoyed this one on second watch. When I first watched it, I was like, oh yeah, Before Sunrise is great. But now, yeah, if I'm a little bit older or something, or just looking at it different perspective, Before Sunset, I was like, oh yeah, this is actually, just as good. It's insane.
So that brings us to your number 4.
My number 4 is Dazed and Confused, which I know is probably going to be a lot higher for you, Neil. Yeah, so this was obviously his first real big feature film after Slacker, and it's a great one. The film focuses on a group of Texas teens in their last day of high school before summer break, and obviously, we're not based in Texas, but this film is something that I think is relatable to anyone, anywhere. That kind of feeling of just breaking up for summer, freedom for 6 weeks, and just doing whatever you want, but also the kind of social pressures of going into freshman year in high school, being at the bottom of this hierarchy. And so this is obviously really relatable to anyone around the world, any time period. You've got those sort of social pressures of school and trying to impress people, or avoid the bullies. Everyone at some point in their life has probably gone through that, so it's it's relatable regardless of its 70s Texas setting. And what was great to see was so many familiar faces that have gone on to do brilliant things. We've got Joey Lauren Adams, Matthew McConaughey, Mila Djokovic, Adam Goldberg, Ben Affleck, Anthony Rapp. Like, there's so many people that have gone on to have really successful careers, both on stage and screen. Yeah, and like I said, this is my first real intro into his work after seeing School of Rock. Seeing this at university was just sort of mind-blowing, to realise that you can make a film about people just talking and hanging out. Like, it doesn't have to be action-packed. It doesn't have to be, dramatic or scary. Like, this was like a real sort of eye-opening experience for me to see it at that kind of pivotal moment in my life, and sort of understand that, yeah, you can just make a film about people and make it about those everyday conversations. And it really opened my perspective into Linklater's filmography and changed the way in which I viewed cinema. I think a lot of people sort of saw films between 17 and 19 that have stuck with them and have shaped the way they enjoy films and the kind of genres they enjoy, and this was definitely one of them for me.
Yeah, I mean, I think you've hit it on the head there. Like, I had that exact reaction to it. I literally wrote a paper on Dazed and Confused about how it was so different to anything else I'd ever seen at that point in my life. Yeah, I mean, it's notable for a myriad of reasons other than just being the stoner film. I mean, although I think the film's marketing definitely leaned into it. If you see the old posters at the time, it's like, see it with a bud and all that. And like most of Linklater's work, it takes place over the course of one day and night on the last day of school in 1976. And I like how the film tried to show all the different types of high schooler, although it didn't really distinguish between them too much. You had the jocks with Jeremy London as a reluctant football star who doesn't want to be told what to do. And I think that's almost Linklater himself. He was a sports star at college who ended up pursuing writing. So you can easily see his personal history coming through in the character of Pink. I only literally clicked that his name was Pink because of Pink Floyd when I watched it a few weeks ago.
Of course, yeah.
Yeah, Randall Pink. And I was like, his name's Randall Floyd. And I was like, why are they calling him? And then I just clicked when I was watching the film. I was like, I've only watched this film maybe 20, 30 times in my life, and I've just picked it up then. I mean, you've got like the intelligent kids, you've got the clever kids, the non-party kids, Adam Goldberg, Anthony Rapp, and Marissa Ribisi. And, they never have anything cool to do other than playing chess and having weird sex dreams about Abraham Lincoln. Then you've got the freshmen, the new kids, who spend a large portion of the film just trying to avoid being hazed by the seniors. And I mean, I remember thinking this was a really weird scene when I was watching it the first time, because we don't really have anything like that in England. Like, there's nothing, it just wouldn't be accepted. But I think it's like what you were saying, yours, that kind of behaviour is so endemic to those communities that for them it's just regular. It's normal. It happens generation after generation. In the UK, if someone tried doing that in the UK, someone would be arrested like that, even in the 70s,
Yeah.
And like you mentioned with the casting, the film unearthed some massive stars in early roles, probably the biggest name being Matthew McConaughey, who only had a bit part role, apparently, and it was expanded because one of the other intended actors, if you see the character, I forget the character's name, but there's a young actor called Sean Andrews at the start, and apparently he didn't get along with the other actors that well, and it wasn't working with the chemistry, so Linklater reduced his role and ended up expanding McConaughey's role. In fact, McConaughey, I read this in research, I think he was out at a pub somewhere with his girlfriend at the time, and someone goes, hey, that's the producer who put this big actor in that film once. And so he just went over and said, you should put me in one of your films. And that's how he got in Dazed and Confused, because of course it is. That's, easily probably how he did it. Bizarrely, Sean Andrews, the guy whose role got reduced, he bizarrely got married to Mila Jovovich the same year when she was only 16. Thankfully, his mother annulled it and got it all taken care of quite soon. So, slightly problematic there. Amazingly, I found some of the actors who auditioned and were considered and then not used. You had Elizabeth Berkley, Mira Sorvino, Ashley Judd, Brendan Fraser, Jon Favreau, Ron Livingston, and Claire Danes. And Renee Zellweger is actually in the film, but she doesn't even have a line.
Is she? Oh my god.
Yep. There's the scene where they're hazing the girls, the freshman girls,
Yeah.
and they're pouring all like the flour over them, and she's just she's in the background of a shot and like pours. I think she has a close up actually, and she pours. And it's funny because she looks very similar to Joey Lauren Adams at that time. So I think a lot of people mistake the two of them. But I was specifically looking out for it when I did the rewatch recently. I was like, that's her in that scene there. And one person you didn't mention, young Oscar winner Ben Affleck. Is probably the closest thing the film's got to an outright villain in O'Banion, the senior who just seems way more into the hazing rituals than anyone else. I mean, it's funny because when he started Affleck, he really played arseholes and all this stuff. Because around the same time as this, he also played he was in Mallrats, and he played the manager of the fashion store, and he was a complete arsehole to all the guys in that all the time. And I just remember how he really started off playing a certain type Affleck in the day.
Was he even acting? That's the question.
Yeah, well, that's the worry, isn't it? But kind of one of the main stars of the film is probably Wiley Wiggins as a freshman, who's probably closest to the main character of the film as we kind of track his journey following him getting to hang out with the seniors all night. The film also featured Cole Hauser, Michelle Burke, Dina Martin, who I was trying to think what was she in, and she was in Swingers. Jon Favreau and Vince Vaughn's early one. I think it's Doug Liman's first film, and because she was like one of the waitresses in that. And I remember that. You've got Jason London, Rory Cochrane, Christina Hinjosa, Nicky Cat, and Parker Posey, both who'd go on to star again with him in Suburbia. And yes, we've got to talk about that iconic Matthew McConaughey as Wooderson. I mean, the role and his dialogue are deeply problematic through a modern lens, with his 20s guy's penchant for teenage schoolgirls. I think you can just about watch it without it. Okay, it's the part he's playing, but like, there's no way that would get made today.
Yeah, no way. But yeah, if you just put yourself in that sort of time period it's meant to be set, and just it's become so iconic, but you're like, oh, it's fine.
It's one of these things. Like I remember when everyone was complaining about like bad lyrics in rock music in like the 90s, and the parental advisory sticker coming out, and everyone was complaining about Guns N' Roses, I think it was at the time, and one of these like Republican senators who was complaining about it was just like, rock music used to be clean back in the 70s. Bands like Aerosmith, and he used "Walk This Way" as an example. And like everyone's like, have you not heard the lyrics to "Walk This Way"? Like, Jesus Christ, they're probably worse. Just because it wasn't swearing, they didn't pick up on it. And it's like, I think I remember reading Steven Tyler saying, "Goes, how is that like the example you use one of our songs?" It's definitely, again, very, very problematic by the modern things. I mean, it feels to me as well like a spiritual successor to George Lucas's American Graffiti, and that it's a hang film. Like the plot isn't really, there isn't. I suppose it's a bit more of like a racing plot in American Graffiti, but it's still this kind of hang film that gives us a glimpse into these kids' lives, which just seems to be involved drinking, smoking, hooking up while driving around, listening to rock music and looking for the next party. And even being a teenager in the 90s in the UK was nothing like this. It did resonate. I remember the nights driving around with your friends and, well, let's go to so-and-so's, there's going to be a party there, and going to the different parties and like having like everyone like having their set list. Well, it would be CDs back then, like I'll mix CDs back then, go, no, we're putting this one on and all that kind of stuff. And like you say, the film has one of the best 70s rock soundtracks of all time. Just some of the majors. You've got Alice Cooper, Aerosmith, ZZ Top, The Runaways, Lynyrd Skynyrd, Kiss, Deep Purple, Black Sabbath, a lot more. As I said, I watched this with my dad recently. He knew almost every single song of them, and it's got a bunch of them on vinyl, which is amazing. He's like, "Oh yeah, I've got this." I was like, "Dad, that's like an original Deep Purple album." "Oh, do you think it's worth something?" "Probably, yes. We should look into that." In fact, 10% of the film's budget was left aside for music rights, because with all the big names of the 70s rock there is one notable exception, and that is Led Zeppelin, who Linklater claims he'd agreed a deal for Rock and Roll to be used over the end credits, which would have been awesome. And he'd agreed it with Jimmy Page, but Robert Plant wouldn't sign off on it. I know. I was like, come on, Robert Plant. I know Zeppelin were very heavy on not letting their songs be used for like 20 odd years or so. However, despite a small budget of only 6.9 million, it only took 8 million at the box office and was seen as a failure at the time of release. Of course, now it is revered as a cult classic. And as we mentioned earlier, I'm just waiting for that 90s grunge film to come out now. So my number 4, we have also just talked about, and that was Boyhood. So we're going to skip ahead to your number 3.
I mean, my number 3 has already been mentioned by yourself, but it's Before Sunset, so I won't go into it too much. But yeah, I was, coming into this, so I was so shocked that these characters didn't turn up, 1 year later when they said they would from the first film. So I was just like, what's going on? This isn't the dream ending. But the way it unfolds, it's become one of my favorites. I love how this is. I love how the fact they didn't meet is very much grounded in reality, and how life changes in those 9 years or so, whether you're having a child or, family members fortunately pass away. It feels very, very real. So you can forgive these characters for those situations. Obviously, in the first one, we see them fall in love, but that's been done 100 times over. But this one, we get to see them having adult conversations and question if they're actually in love with their current partners or, the dating scene that, Celine is going through. I really liked the involvement of Ethan Hawke and Julie Delpy in this one, and you can really see the balanced arguments from the male and female characters, and everyone can access this film from its balanced script writing and having, that sort of kind of holistic approach through Linklater. I think is excellent. And the ending of this film, a lot of people, a lot of the producers wanted them to change the ending of this film. I really like this one. I like the kind of cliffhanger it sort of finishes on. It's one of my favourites in the trilogy, and I think it says a lot about the character. When they're in the apartment and just sort of dancing, listening to music. He's like, "You got a plane to catch?" She's like, "No." He just kind of stays there, and I really like the ending. I'm glad they didn't change it. So
Yeah, I mean, what would they change it to, actually? Because, I mean, for me, I think it was implicit that he is going to stay and they are going to get together.
Yeah.
It's a lot more obvious to me in that than it is at the end of the first film.
Yeah, you don't need to explain it.
Yeah.
Some people treat the audience as dumb sometimes, and I think you can work it out for yourself. You don't need to be. I think they wanted it to end in a kiss, and I was like, that's just. But then you're falling into the cliche of every romance, and which is very unlike Linklater.
Exactly, which, Before Sunrise is the antithesis. We did our top 10 romantic films of all time, and mine and my co-host, it was just so different. He was all Notting Hill, all his Richard Curtis stuff, all the standard ones you expect to be on there, a bunch of Disney films, and I was like, I must have gone the indie route. I had Before Sunrise, Eternal Sunshine, A Spotless Mind, all that kind of stuff on there. So we had two very, very different lists. So my number 3 is probably Linklater's most commercially successful film of all time, which is School of Rock. And until this point, he kind of had a reputation as an independent filmmaker. And you kind of look at his filmography, and the more his budgets go up and the larger names he worked with, until this point anyway, his films actually seem to fail commercially. I mean, he did a Western called The Newton Boys in the early 90s, and it had Skeet Ulrich, Matthew McConaughey, Ethan Hawke, and someone else in it that I can't remember, who is also famous now. But it bombed massively because obviously Linklater doing a Western, there's not a lot of action, there's a lot of people standing around talking. So, as a Linklater film, it's great, it's brilliant. But as a Western that you're accustomed to watching, it's not. School of Rock was his first, it was his first mainstream hit as a director at the box office. And I mean, again, it's this kind of conflation, is that the word? It's this kind of combination of 3 different key parts that made it so successful. You had Jack Black, who had been doing this kind of, Jack Black's typical stick for a while. And I think Linklater found the best way to harness him in this film. It was also written by the White Lotus's Mike White. So you had that on the script side of things. Because I think Linklater, when he sticks to writing about his kind of key areas, he does great. But I think what makes him a great director is he knows sometimes that, okay, that's not really my area. So he'll hand it off to another writer, or he'll adapt something that he has an interest in. It's funny that I remember Mike White, he did a really disturbing film in the early 2000s called Chuck and Buck, I think it's called.
Oh, I don't know that one.
I'm trying to think who one of the actors is in it. That's definitely worth looking. It's very disturbing. And Mike White is one of the main actors in it as well.
Ooh, okay.
It's funny because he started as a writer on Dawson's Creek, of all places.
Oh, really? That's interesting to see where he's gone to now.
Yeah, and now he's king of HBO with the White Lotus over there. But yeah, this film had a budget of 35 million and it made 131 million in the box office. And I think we all know the story. White stars a struggling rock guitarist Dewey Finn, who's fired from his band and poses as a substitute teacher before he gets thrown out by his roommate Ned and his grating girlfriend Patty, played superbly by Sarah Silverman. Now, clearly not being cut out to teach, he sees that many of his kids have musical talent, and he forms a plan to get his band full of high schoolers to play the Battle of the Bands, which will give him his rent money. I mean, I guess the film doesn't really specify how long for, because I imagine a regional Battle of the Bands wouldn't pay that much to cover your rent for more than a month or two. When I rewatched his recently, I was like, it can't be that much money you're going to get from it. They probably mention it in the film, but even if it was 10 grand, that's still not going to do you long, even when this film came out. But Black's exuberant tone is just so spot on for this film. You see his enthusiasm transfer over to the kids. And I mean, they all deliver and steal the show themselves. This film is probably the closest Linklater has come to a standard Hollywood film. But also, when you look at his recent career, I think he like takes the odd studio safe bet film to fund his more experimental works. And again, you just see what he went on to do after School of Rock. He didn't do anything like regular for a while after that. You know, Scanner Darkly came out and all those kind of things.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, it's just so fun, this film. So, what is your number 2?
My number 2 is Before Sunrise. So the first film in the Before trilogy. So in this one we have Jesse, who meets Celine on a train to Vienna and demands that she leaves the train and comes with him to explore the city before he has to catch a flight back to America in the morning. So we have this time constraint. It's going to happen over one night. Perfect. I love this kind of film. And immediately I was drawn into these characters from the first scene, the dynamic on the train, and, you know, they're both, you know, these very arty, intellectual students reading their books on the train. And, you know, there's a couple having an argument. They're kind of, oh, that's a bit, you know, bizarre. So the connection they instantly have is excellent. I was completely drawn into them. And what I loved about this was the first time I really saw a walk and talk, you know, something a bit different. Like you've said previously, Neil, how, you know, we've had the romantic comedies that, you know, the 90s and noughties that felt very, you know, cliched in some ways. You know, it ticks a lot of boxes and what those sort of romantic films need to be. But this one felt different. It felt organic. It felt natural. For a lot of the film, I thought the dialogue was improvised. And then to watch the behind the scenes, you're like, oh, actually, this was carefully scripted and there's like no room for improvisation. Is absolutely crazy to me. And I think that comes from, you know, the script itself and the performance, just to make it feel so, yeah, organic. I think the walk and talk works so well because the conversations and the tension and the changing atmospheres work really well. It really adds a lot to their conversation, just like you would, you know, if you're walking somewhere with your partner, you talk about something you see, or, you know, you just turn the conversation to something maybe a little bit deeper about your personal life or whatever it may be. And there's always that ticking time bomb of the sunrise and the constraints that they only have a limited amount of time, what they're going to do at the end. So I think this is a great kind of young love indie film that just, to me, just blew my mind because it felt like something new and different. And clearly it's a lot of people's favourites. You know, a lot of people I talk about, you know, in film community, it's one of their favourites. It's always in their sort of, you know, top 20 or so. And I think it's just withheld, you know, its sort of status by being timeless, as always Linklater does. You know, the outfits are clearly 90s with, you know, Jesse's leather jacket and his goatee. But, you know, nonetheless, these conversations are happening every day. So I think it's just so beautiful. It makes me smile. It makes me cry. Yeah, it's one of my favourite rom-coms ever.
Yeah, it's the same. As I mentioned before, this is my number 1 on most romantic films of all time, just because it does feel so more realistic than the standard Hollywood films we kind of get shown all the time. And I like how when the film starts, you know, they are the slight opposites, you know, but they joke about it, like the script's knowing enough to know, okay, the setup of, like, you know, the glamorous, sophisticated French girl and the, you know, grungy, uneducated American. But they're aware of it, and so they address it head on straight away. And by addressing it, they kind of get past it. You're like, okay, well, they know what they're on about. Like you say, because the film's aware of it, it just works. What I love about it as well, the film does a superb job of making it feel like Jesse and Celine are the only 2 people in the world.
Yeah.
Like when they're walking through Vienna, they do interact with a few people, but none of them are character names really. There's no like actual other characters in it bar them. I remember the guy who invites him to the play to see the play about the cow that has mental difficulties. That was and you're like, they're not going to that play.
No.
Like you say, it resonates because you know, when you're younger, you have those nights where you meet someone, you chat away, and like the hours go by, and you're like, shit, it's like almost daylight, and we've just been wandering around. And I think, you know, I remember a couple of times in my life where I was working overseas, and you know, you'd have a night out in some foreign city, and you just like, you know, you start chatting with someone, and it would be the thing, because I worked on a ship, I would be leaving the next morning.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't probably see that person ever again. So it was like, wow. I was like, and of course, this is because I'd seen this film before I was doing it. I was just like, shit, I'm actually living this sometimes there. Like, should I just like not go back to work and get fired and just like risk my whole like career for someone I've literally just met and hit it off with? I mean, I didn't, but you know, I'm just like, I mean, yeah, apparently Linklater said himself this whole film was based on an interaction he actually had himself when he met a woman named Amy Lerhaupt in a toy store in 1989. And he said they walked around Philadelphia talking long into the night. Sadly, in 2013, Linklater revealed that she died in a motorbike accident before the film came out. I mean, this film is almost a stream of consciousness from both characters. There's no space for anything else in the film. There's no other characters. And I love the final shots of this film. And I confess, I got this next statement somewhere years ago. I read this bit of criticism that someone wrote. And so I'm not going to take credit for it. But it said, I love how it shows us the same places where Jesse and Celine spent the night and how here in daylight without them, the places themselves seem diminished. And that just, that really stuck with me.
Yeah.
So yeah, my number 2 we've already talked about, which was Dazed and Confused. So I don't really think there's much more you need to say about that. So we've covered it off. So I guess that's going to bring us to your number 1.
My number 1 is School of Rock, which I know you've previously mentioned. So I'll just sort of briefly talk about a few points on that one. Obviously, yeah, the comedy straight up. Seeing this at 7 years old, I think I was like, it was perfect. I could really sort of relate to a lot of the kids in this, and I think Jack Black was a big name for me in that sort of mid 2000s time. He was everywhere in a lot of mainstream films that I was watching at that time, so it's great to see him just acting a little crazy in this, and I love it. I think I've seen it so many times. It's become a real comfort film to me. If I'm feeling a little bit ill or a little bit down, this is one that I'm going to put on, and it's going to make me smile and laugh. And what I love about this film is how Dewey talks to these kids like adults, and when you're a child, you can really appreciate that. You're not talking down to kids. It's kind of treating them as real people, which I loved, and I think they appreciate it in the film as well. And then I don't know why I put this, but last time I watched this again about a month ago, I cried whilst watching this, which I don't think I've ever done before. But when they're sort of in the final moment of the Battle of the Bands scene, and I just sort of felt this kind of happy tears, and I was just like, this is bizarre. Not for any particular reason. I think just kind of like maybe some kind of euphoria, like they've done what they wanted to achieve, and yeah, it just proves how even now seeing it 20 plus times, it can still sort of resonate with me. Like you say, you pick up on certain things you've missed before. Obviously going into it now, knowing who Mike White is, was interesting to see him in this one. But yeah, it's just so fun. It's got humor for kids, adults. It's got those jokes, where he's at the parent-teacher conference and he's like, oh, your kids have all really touched me, and I'm pretty sure I've touched them. You maybe not getting that as a child, but you're watching it now, and it's hilarious. And I think even though, like you've said, it's allowing Richard Linklater allows another writer to come in like Mike White and sort of work with him when he's maybe not as strong suited. I think he said before he hadn't really worked with kids before. But you wouldn't know that watching that for the first time. So he sees his own strengths and weaknesses, and I think the pairing really works for this film. And it's just so iconic for me, even though it doesn't feel like his general kind of filmography in terms of that more indie paced, slice of life film. It's still something that as a whole film for me works, and has brought me into some great taste of music. So yeah, it's a great film.
Yeah, I think for a lot of kids, it's probably their kind of first exposure to like rock music, isn't it?
Oh yeah,
and,
I knew like who Stevie Nicks was at 7, and it was crazy.
And I think from the film, like how many kids picked up guitar for the first time because of that?
Yeah.
Why it's so high up on mine is because I was in a band when I was a kid, like at school. So those whole things, and I did the bit he does at the start. I jumped off stage with my guitar once. Crowd wasn't big enough to like crowd surf, and everyone just moved out of the way. Exactly the same.
God,
so I didn't go front down like that because I had my guitar. I realised, shit, this is going to be really bad. So I turned and landed on my back, and then I managed to stand up, didn't fall over, and I was like, yeah. And then my ankle just gave out and I collapsed. No. And it turned out I'd really busted up my ankle like 3 days later when I finally went to hospital to get it looked at. But I mean, we did a gig at our school when we were maybe 16, 17, and it was our first ever gig, and we supported the PE teachers band. And now how creepy that is now when you think about it, that a band for the 20-something school teachers there, and I always remember it being almost packed there, but that could just be like roasting in glasses. But there was definitely a good couple of hundred kids there because it was at our school on a weeknight, and it was a charity thing. So all the
Mm.
money was going to a charity. I think it was some task we'd been set at school. And we was like, we'll put a gig on,
Yeah.
and that's how we got around it. To like,
Oh, wow.
the school allowed us to do it,
Nice.
and so like there was like there was lights, there was smoke machines, all that, and it was just full of like young girls there to see the PE teachers, man, who they all fancied.
Oh, no.
So problematic in the modern day, right? And we went on before them, and we were better than them. Like, we were actually better than them. And like, when it comes to the end of the set, they played 3 songs that we played in our set, and we played them better. And like, we did Oasis Live Forever. They did Oasis Live Forever. At the end of it, I'm like hobbling because I'd done my leg at this point, and the crowd were chanting for us to go back. So we went up, and I think we ended up playing Nirvana Territorial Pissings, which is always a good one to like go towards the end of the night. And then, do you remember this was a one-hit wonder band called Green Jelly, and they did a rocked-up version of Three Little Pigs. It was like a heavy metal version of Three Little Pigs, and we did that, and it was funny watching our singer who'd kind of been standing there at the mic all night, and he suddenly just started jumping around the stage and going absolutely crazy, like the bass player who kind of blown in the corner, like really calm, and and so like watching School of Rock, it just brings back all those memories of doing something similar, and So that brings us to my number 1 film, and yes, it's one we already talked about, which was your number 3, I believe.
Yeah.
Which was Before Sunrise, and yeah, I mean, it had to be Before Sunrise at number 1 for me because, again, as I mentioned previously when we discussed it for your one, it just resonated so much. I still want to do a Euro-rail travel through Europe someday. I'm literally saving at the minute to like just go and do it and like spend like a month going around Europe just to like do that film. I'm even thinking about doing Vienna.
Me too. I've looked at trips to Vienna before.
Yeah, I mean, when the film influences you that much, I'm just like, right, I just need to do it.
Yeah.
So the fact that the film influenced me all the way back then, and I'm still thinking about it and still wanting to do stuff like that now. Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's much more I can say about Before Sunrise that I didn't say before, but it is one of my all-time favourites. If I had to do my top 10 of all time, it wouldn't be in the top 5.
That's fair.
We'll do that some other time. But I did ask for some listener comments about Linklater last week, and Smiling Politely at Loving Pages said, Boyhood is one of my favourite movies of all time. I ended up crying like a baby every time. The theme of growth and the passage of time has always struck me a lot. It's an underrated film for me. It took 12 years to make. Indeed it did.
Yeah.
Ken Murray at Murray Makeup, brilliant handle there. Maybe not favourite, but Everybody Wants Some is criminally underrated. I'll agree with that.
I got it on my list, so I get it, Ken.
Film Church Radio at Film Church Radio think the popularity of School of Rock has diminished it in public opinion. It's so good. Favourite, Dazed and Confused and Bernie are both great movies. Too many to choose. I mean, someone's saying Bernie their favourite film of Linklater's.
Yeah, I mean, I put it in at number 10. There's so many great ones. So
yeah, it didn't make my list. Diabolical, Evil Schemes Done Better at Diabolical Pod said, Boyhood is mind-blowingly impressive, but I think the one I enjoyed most is A Scanner Darkly. So again, a different favourite. Marcelo Aris Soto said, in all capitals, Bernie. So we have got Bernie as someone's favourite there. West Ray's Bolita at WSC91 Pain Train said, it's the Before trilogy for me. So, again, that's 3 films, not 1, but I get what you mean. You can look at them as an overall body of work. So, few final questions. Do you think that he's underrated overall?
I think, especially if you studied film, they're always going to come up as terms of wants to study and maybe think of different ways of filmmaking. And I always recommend people when some people are, I've never seen a Linklater film. Like, you probably have. It's maybe just been disguised as, School of Rock or, something a bit more mainstream. But you probably have seen a Linklater, if you've sort of been watching films the last 30 years or so. But yeah, I think he's underrated, definitely.
I mean, I thought as his time kind of come and gone, like some of his contemporaries. It's like at the time, like a lot of the other filmmakers, like Kevin Smith, for example, had that great run in the 90s into the early 2000s, and then just kind of fell off a cliff, sadly, in terms of his output. I mean, I was a massive Linklater and Smith were the two directors that really got me into film. I mean, when I watched Clerks, I was essentially living in Clerks too, and I was like, I'm going to write a film where it's Clerks, but in a fast food restaurant. I just waited too long because he did it, and it was Clerks too.
Yeah.
But it was so cool when I saw that. I was like, this is exactly how I'd done it. Because, and the fact he used Smashing Pumpkins 1979, I was like, I would literally have used that song in the same place. I mean, chemistry, he still has got it. Like, I saw Clerks 3 earlier in the year, and I was like, although his filmmaking hasn't come on, when it's characters you care about, like Dan Randall, he's still got it there. Like, Clerks 3 is probably one of the few films where I was like, I'm definitely not crying there at the end when they have, like, Pearl Jam, Just Breathe, which again, when you think, oh, what song would you have played at your funeral? And I was like, Pearl Jam, Just Breathe would be a good one. And then they do it in a funeral scene. I was like, holy crap.
Yeah.
So the fact that even now, I'm still on the same wavelength. I've got a signed Clerks and Chasing Amy script indoors on the shelf, which is just, one of my prized possessions. But I feel like I'm kind of wrong with that question because I think Linklater is still consistently making brilliant work. And it's again, he's so eclectic in what he's doing. I think he was nominated for the Oscar, wasn't he, for Boyhood back a while ago. But with his upcoming films, so actually let's talk his next film. What do you know about Hitman coming out on Netflix soon?
I mean, obviously, I've seen it's got really great reception at Venice, New York, even London Film Festival. I think I read the synopsis that's kind of like this romantic sort of thing. I was like, that's interesting considering you've named it Hitman. Obviously brings back Glenn Powell, who seems to be like his new muse, maybe his new Ethan Hawke. So I'm interested to see what he's going to do with this role. I'm going in open-minded. I've not watched. I don't think we've got a trailer.
No, I haven't seen one yet. No.
I've not watched it. I've just seen a couple of stills, and that's it. And I kind of want to go in blind, but I'm super excited to see that one because people's opinions I value have said it's great. So I'm excited.
Yeah, some of the comments I've seen of like when they've said it's like a sexy crime film, and I was like, the immediate thing that makes you think of is something like Out of Sight. Yeah. So if I get even half the sort of like the chemistry in that of but again, you wouldn't expect Linklater to make I'm just trying to imagine now what a film about a romantic film with a hitman, where Linklater would be like. Is it like Before Sunrise with more executions? So,
Yeah, they're like, oh, I'm just going to go, assassinate someone. And then they're just talking about really deep things. Well, what do you think about the meaning of life? Like, it's going to be bizarre.
I can't wait to see that. But that was for Netflix. So that's going to be along soon. But his big project coming up that has been announced, and I don't know how much should we starting it, it's called Merrily We Roll Along. And it's set to star Paul Mescal. And it's set to be filmed over 20 years. Because apparently 12 years wasn't long enough for Boyhood. So, I mean, if he gets this off the ground, if he makes it and he actually does do the film over 20 years, I mean, he'll be pushing his late 70s then.
Yeah.
To be fair though, like Scorsese and Ridley Scott are still absolutely knocking it out of the park now in their mid-80s, so no problem there at all, really. So, I mean, Linklater can easily do this. You just got to give him the Oscar there, right? If the film's been made over 20 years and it's good as well,
Yeah, this is going to be, when they always owe like an actor or director an Oscar. I think this will probably be it. But everyone, he should have got it for the Before trilogy, but he'll probably go for this film, I think.
Like you said earlier, he opens up so many people to a different way of filmmaking and a different way of realism in films, and just showing that the small moments in life are the ones that actually are worth focusing on. Everything in film doesn't need to be epic and stakes at the end of the world and dramatic and all that. It can just be small, simple, and intimate.
Exactly. Yeah, I think, it doesn't matter, you're based in Texas, you grew up in the 70s, like there's something that everyone can, attach themselves to, and it's just because it's about people. And I think that's what makes him so different. Obviously you have directors like your Michael Bays or your Scorsese's that you go to for certain types of films. And I think Linklater's become his own version of that, just to letting people have conversations, or, okay, maybe he does the every now, like, more kind of mainstream film. But I think generally he'll be known as the slice of life indie filmmaker, and that's what you still need that in cinema, and I'm glad that he's still doing that now.
Yeah, I mean, you're almost right. He's almost like his own genre, isn't he? Like Wes Anderson is when you go and see a Wes Anderson film,
that's true.
It's his own genre. Like, what's it about? It doesn't matter. It's a Wes Anderson film.
It's the aesthetics. You know what you're getting. So,
and like Lee say with Linklater, he's a slice of life guy, isn't he? So,
yeah.
Well, this is drawing to a close now. So, cheers, Sarah. This has been brilliant having you on. And where can people find you on the socials?
Oh, well, you can mainly find me on YouTube under the name Popcornchat. I do lots of sort of latest film releases, maybe some rankings of different directors or franchises. You can catch that on there. Twitter, it's @Popcornchat. Instagram, Sarah's Popcornchat, and Letterboxd Popcornchat. So if you type in Popcornchat somewhere, you'll find me.
Brilliant. Oh, well, as I say, thanks for coming, and we'll see you next time.